In this video, we'll go through and shoot up to 7 different bracketed shots automatically on the Canon 90D. Also, we'll shift the bracket range so you can just have exposures all compensating minus the meter reading or all bracketed above. It doesn't have to be above and minus as an even equation. So let's get started. What is AEB? What is automatic exposure bracketing? It's used for shooting multiple exposures at different brightness levels, and it happens automatically. You don't have to manually bracket. You can set it up so there's an automatic series of photographs taken, and it can be used for where there's high contrast in the scenes, high dynamic range, where in landscapes, seascapes, where you've got can be some very bright skies, and you get some quite shaded areas as well. So you've got a very high dynamic range. And you can set it up so in the Canon 90D it supports 3, 5 or 7 multiple exposures, all taken in the sequence. On the scale it shows up to 3 stops spacing between each, but you can actually continue on and get up to 9 stops, but it just won't show on the scale, but it will continue on and actually produce those images. The automatic exposure bracketing works on AV, aperture priority, TV, shutter priority, and also on manual mode, but it doesn't work on bulb mode. Also take note that if your exposures are beyond a certain shutter speed, as in too slow, well then the burst mode, which you have it set on for these automatic exposures, it won't cope, so it doesn't actually then fire them off. However, what you can do is that you can have those 3, 5 or 7 exposures automatically lined up, and they can be fired off manually. So if your shutter speed's too slow, you can fire them off manually, because they will not fire off in burst mode. Further example, let's say I'm shooting at a 2/50th of a second. The Canon 90D will fire off all of the 7 automatic exposure bracketing shots in a single burst, no problem whatsoever. Let's say I now bring my exposures down to 1 second each. I now need to either go over to manual and just do manual exposures for bracketing, or they can just still be left in the camera, and I go into single shot mode instead of the burst mode. Just go over, I just simply am now pressing the shutter multiple times to get those bracketed exposures, even though they're automatically lined up to fire off, but at 1 second they won't do the single burst. So to set this up, I'm on preview mode, and I've come across and pressed the menu button on the top left there. And we're coming across 2 ways to move across the icons, by the way. You can either press the Q button, which I've just got my thumb there on, or where I was moving the dial across. But if you press the Q button, it jumps across, and this is into shooting mode. I call it the orange camera icon, and we're looking for number 1, and the top of the list there is the exposure one. That's the one we're looking for. And we press the set button to open it up. We're not setting it, we're opening it by pressing the set button. And here we're faced with a number of shots. Now we're going to ignore the scale on the left, the numbers on the left. We can come back to that. But here I just want to focus on the number of shots, 3, 2, 5 or 7. And in this case I want to get 7 shots. So I've pressed the 7 shots. It's the number on the right hand side that tells you the number of shots. Now keep in mind, with the setting that we put in place, you can just walk around with your camera set on that, and knowing that in this case I've got it set for 7 different shots. So I can then just leave that, and then when I do want to do exposure bracketing, I know it's set on 7 shots. Now I come along at any time. It can be immediately afterwards, obviously, or it can be at my next 3 shooting sessions later. I go, oh yes, I've got it set for 7. So now I want to adjust what bracketing is actually going to take place. So to achieve what bracketing is actually going to take place, I come along and I press menu. and I can brought up the display again. And this time I want the red camera icon, which is the number 1, and I'm going to the number 2 with the exposure compensation settings. Now, by moving the wheel, I can move this one up and down. So I could press in at any point and hold that, and it would do the regular shot and the whatever I put it on. But I've got 7 shots, and what I do is I'm now turning the wheel at the top of the camera, which opens this up, and see the increments. So we've got 3 on either side and 1 in the middle, and that's the 7 shots. And we can move it right out. So we can maximum go. We've got the central shot, we've got 3 under, 6 under, and 9 under. Even though it's not showing on the scale, it will produce a 9 under shot. So I've now got those settings in place. So you adjust to whatever it is that you want. And obviously it would have to be very extreme to go to the full 9 separate stops. It would have to be extreme conditions where, say you had an interior and a very small window and it was very, very bright. The sun was pouring in at one point and you wanted detail there, and the shadows were really dark. That's the sort of thing where you'd push it right out, and then you could sandwich those images together if you wanted to and create one. Or simply use it to pick the favorite, but it's very unlikely that it's going to be the 9 stops out. That's for sure. So I've got it set up for 7 shots. So here's a sequence of 7 shots that it automatically exposes in burst mode. I think the slowest shutter speed for this sequence is 100th of a second, so there's absolutely no problem using burst mode, that's for sure. And it starts off at meter reading, then it goes to -1 stop, then minus 2/3 of a stop, 1/3 of a stop and minus. Then we move over to plus 1/3, plus 2/3 of a stop, and then the final one is 1 stop. So that's your 7 burst images, and I have it set up for the 7th. As a default setting on the Canon 90D, the arrangement is that the images, say where I've just taken that sequence of 7 different shots, it starts off with the meter reading, then it's the minus bracketing shots, whatever you've set it to, and then it's the above, the plus shots that are then photographed. But you can change that, and you can change it to minus and then the meter reading and then the plus, and you can go plus meter reading and then minus. So to make that change, to choose whichever one you want, you're coming across back to this particular setting with what I call the orange camera icon, the red one I call over on the left, and then you want to press in on exposure and go to number 4, where you then get the other image and you can select which one you prefer, what sequence. Now, one of the things you can do also, the default setting again is, you see how it's all centered. So you can actually shift, see how I'm rotating the dial? By rotating that dial, I can move the whole scale so that all the bracketed exposures are above or minus, or an extra one plus or minus. So you have that freedom of which to, so say I'm in a situation where I just want them all under meter reading, so I can slide it across to just under meter reading if I want. It's a great thing. You don't have to have this even split of above and minus. I often use automatic exposure bracketing, where I like to use, often I'm bringing out color saturations and I'm hand holding shots, and I'll just do a couple of under meter readings to bring out those colors, especially if the day has got some lovely burst of sunshine and everything. It can really bring the colors out. And I set it up for that, and that's wonderful. But one of the things you can be doing, and it's a very frequent reason why you'd be bracketing, is what I call sandwiching, but it's also known as exposure blending, HDR, merging. You're bracketing the image, you're merging the whole thing, the HDR, combining exposures, layer masking, another expression. All these sort of common references, where essentially what you're doing is that you're taking different exposures where you, with the bracketing, where you've exposed for the highlight, you've also exposed for the shadow, and you blend all these in the processing. Now, if you're doing that, the one key point, it might seem obvious, but you need a tripod for that, because if you're relying on staying completely still and getting these multiple shots, however fast really the shutter speed, it's very difficult, and you will end up getting a slight blurring softness effect at the very, very least with your merged images. So use a tripod. So let's quickly recap what it's all about. AEB, which is automatic exposure bracketing, it takes multiple shots at different exposure levels that you can choose yourself, whether it's minus the meter reading, whether it's plus the meter reading. The default setting is for 3 frames to be shot on the Canon 90D. You can change that to 5 or 7. You can have underexposed, then meter reading, and overexposed. The default setting is for it to shoot meter reading minus and then the plus, but you can set that to any way around that you want. There are choices there on the Canon 90D. And again, when I say the Canon 90D, many other cameras have very, very similar setups. So as I say, you can have 3 to 5 or 7 exposures. You can alter the sequence of the bracketing. You need to have continuous shooting drive to take full advantage of with the burst mode. Or you can shoot them off manually as well, especially if you've got the longer exposures that won't work on the continuous shooting. You'll need to then fire them off. I definitely use a tripod if you're doing post-processing and blending of the images. And I really hope you've found this video interesting and useful. If you do have an interest in long exposures, I'll leave a special link so you have a special deal there if you want to check out my Seascape long exposure course. And if you have enjoyed this, do press like, do subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you for watching.